Hello and welcome to today's Claimversation. My name is Ashley Sneller, VP of Marketing at Benekiva, and I'm here today with the one and only Jes Vargas. Jes, can you give us a quick introduction into who you are and why you're passionate about claims?
Absolutely. So I'm the director of product and solutions at Benekiva. I started my career in the insurance industry in claims. So I processed at a carrier. I processed life and annuity claims, and then moved into disability when I moved to my next company. So I worked there for about 2-3 years. And then I moved into kind of the technology space, but I still did process claims for a few years before that. And I worked at a TPA. So I've done quite a bit of claims processing in different environments. And then I actually did more around entire ecosystem transformations, big projects at two different technology companies in their TPA space. I was specifically a business analyst around life and annuity claims as well as disability claims, but I did help out with other areas in policy servicing, things like that. And then I ran ops excellence at my last company prior to Benekiva. So I actually trained people on our system that we use today and helped document the system. And I did UAT testing. So I've been in Benekiva longer than I've been at Benekiva. But I've been in the space in a lot of different facets over the years.
Definitely a jack of all trades. So really excited for this conversation since you'll have so many different viewpoints on it. But just for context, the goal of these Claimversations is we're looking at the intersection between people, processes, and technology and finding that sweet spot in the middle so that we can make the best experience for claimants and also the people serving those claimants. So today we're going to focus in on a specific passion project of Jess's, which is correspondence standardization. So for context, Jess, what is correspondence standardization and why does it matter?
Sure. Okay, so most carriers, when we get our hands on them, or if you're part of any kind of transformation, not even claims, it could be any, if they're transitioning to a new pass system or something like that, they go through essentially a lot of time with the business analysts and solution architects and things like that to go through everything that they do today, right? The things that we find when we go through these processes is a lot of duplicated templates. So what I mean by that is that you'll have one letter for, let's just say, an initial claim report letter, right? And they'll have 50 different versions because there's different fraud language for every single state. So the rest of the letter will be exactly the same. So this particular effort is more to help streamline, gain efficiencies, and make their updating and things like that easier, right? So it tends to be a little bit prickly when we go in and actually talk to people about this. But it's really important in order for them to, number one, gain efficiencies, keep their communication with their customers clear, and, remain compliant and stick with those regulatory guidelines as well. So
That's huge. Putting it into perspective, since you have worked with quite a few carriers, do you have a good example of what it looked like before a carrier went through standardization and then after?
Oh, yeah. So I worked at one company where we were doing an implementation, and we did, it was mainly lines of business for life and annuity, but there were a lot of different riders like disability, things like that. We were converting 24 admin systems onto one. So that's a lot of different, maybe it was blocks that they had, that particular carrier had, but it could also be things that they've acquired over time. When they acquire things, typically we're dealing with a whole nother set of correspondence, whole nother set of processes and all of that, right? So when you go into a project like that, usually they're taking it in bite-sized chunks. You're starting with certain, pass systems and moving them that way. But you're dealing with this large, and by large, I mean hundreds and hundreds of letters in a library, even just related to claims, hundreds of letters, right? Because over the years, especially when you're dealing with more legacy systems and there hasn't been, any kind of modernization in their correspondence or moving to a different system, you're dealing with a lot of people who have kept templates pretty much on their local or in a shared drive, right? And those templates will be labeled specifically to say, this is an initial letter for a minor beneficiary in Utah, right? So that when the examiner goes in, they know to pick that one. But that is a whole letter itself. When it could merely be variables, right? So that's one of the important things that we do when we come into these is we say, okay, let's look at everything you have. Let's try to find the commonalities in the language, in what information you're actually trying to communicate, so that we can say, let's reduce little bit over time, right? We're not going to be able to do big bang, reduce you by 80% off the gate, because that's going to be also really jarring for the operations teams, right? So yeah, that tends to be in that particular instance, I think by the time I left the project, we had reduced, I think, about 40%, which was
Wow.
significant, pretty significant. And we weren't even through the project entirely yet. We were only halfway through. So, and then I think even in those cases, there's still areas where you need to go back and revisit it over time, because, you know, your first effort's going to be great, but there's still going to be things you're going to find later on, especially as people get used to it. Right. But that's an example of one of them. There was I think if I remember correctly, the claims letters, there was something like near 300.
Wow.
Yeah, which is it's just really, it's a lot, especially when you're dealing with two product lines. I mean, I know we were dealing with, you know, you're dealing with term life, universal life, variable universal life, all of these different variations of life, and then all your variations of annuities. But think about if you had five, let's say five claims letters that you typically send on a term, multiply that by every single iteration of product line that you have, and that's at a minimum. That's with no other variations. So I think it's a broad, I mean, it may be a kind of a gutsy statement, but I think no matter where you are in your transformation right now, even if you've just gone through something, there's always going to be improvement that you can make. I could go in today and probably cut out a few of your letters today.
I even think though about downstream effects of, I mean, we throw around words like operational efficiency and these kind of
Mhm.
lofty goals, but I even just think, what if I were to go start working at a carrier and now I all of a sudden have to understand, memorize, and know when to properly use
Yeah,
300 different documents?
right.
It's just a lot as someone that's working there, or as someone who's even been there for, a couple of years, but making sure you get it right and don't have an error
Mhm.
that then is costly. That just seems like there's so much that it could do to
Yeah.
better the company too.
Well, yeah, and you put so much of the decision making on the actual person creating the letter and processing it, right? When in a lot of these cases, that decision can come out of their hands, right? If we're talking about I have an initial letter, okay, and it's for an annuity product and it's non-qualified annuity and it's all simple single, beneficiary, right? That's that decision doesn't need to be made. That can be looked at in the past system. You could look at the beneficiary arrangement. You could look at the qual code of the annuity. All that stuff can be systematically driven, where let's put the focus on the things that they actually need to make decisions on and the things that they need to analyze. Even if there are parts of the letter where they do need to contribute something or make a decision, that's great. Take away the other 80% of the stuff that we already have in the system, because most often this stuff isn't just in the past, it's also in their workflow system and their document management system. There's plenty of different places they can pull that from, right? I just think it's the hardest thing, and you're probably going to hear me say this a couple of times, but the hardest thing is going in and telling somebody, you do this today, but you don't need to do it this way, and this is why. Because it's the hardest thing to get them to veer off from something that they already do. That's change management is the hardest part of any space and transformation you work, not just claims, any of those organizations. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So I guess with that in mind, if I'm a carrier listening right now
Mhm.
and I resonate with these pain points, we have hundreds of forms and we want to try and make it so that people have the time they need to focus on the decisions that matter and we save some of the error processing. What do I do? How do I go about trying to add this standardization in?
Okay. Well, I think that everybody thinks that you have to have all of these things in place before you can start something like this. You need to know every piece of information. If you know your past system is going to be due for an upgrade in 2 years, you don't want to start it until then because we're going to have XYZ, right? There's there's no it's just like getting married. There's no perfect time, right? But you just start it. So start it with as slow, as you need to, depending on your resources, because you don't want to overcommit the people that you have in operations too, right? But the simplest way to start is by just putting all of your templates together and looking at them in an inventory, right? Inventory what you have, inventory the types inventory the commonalities between them, inventory the triggers of when you would want to send them, inventory the last time this template's been edited, right? Because that is also something that we'll see where somebody has a template they use every single day, compliance hasn't looked at it in 5 years. Like that's a problem, right? And it's hopefully not happening very often, but I have seen it, right? And so I think that the first thing to do is to do your inventory, categorize what types of letters and what groups that you have. You're always going to have the one-offs, like we call them the ad hoc letters. But especially in claims, right? You have you have the same set. You have an initial letter, a follow-up letter, you have explanation of benefits, you may have a not in good order letter or NIGO letter where you say, I need more documents. And then, hey, we are reviewing your documents. It's going to take a little bit more time, those kind of things, right? You have the same kind of buckets. Then put all of those things from your inventory into those buckets and see what you're dealing with and look at the different things that you're essentially classifying them in different triggers and different variables, right? I think another piece of this is when you dig into it, after you do the initial inventory, start with your biggest hit, where you would get the most benefit today if we standardized, right? So for claims specifically, that's going to be generally your initial letter, your claim packet letter. And if you look at that and you review every single one you have, review the voice, review the tone, you're obviously going to have to work with your compliance department to make sure that they're on the same page and that they agree with what you're doing. But try to find through your templates, all of the areas where there are differences. So if it's a different paragraph and why that's a different paragraph. Because those are the things when you come into a system where you can start doing some of the automation. Like I do it today at Benekiva. I say, okay, well, this paragraph you only need if there's a divorce, right? If the insured is divorced, right? We can set an indicator in the system to populate that for you, right? So I think that finding those little things that can be more logic based as opposed to things where they need to type a value in or add some kind of ad hoc language, because there will always be manual correspondence in some way. You always are going to have it, right? But if you can make it, again, the 20% as opposed to the 80, you're going to be better off. And then you'll have more room to move towards some automation of some of these things like follow-ups and explanation of benefits. If you can systematically drive by logic, think about the time savings on your team and the time that they can actually spend with the beneficiaries or, talking to these people as opposed to just plugging away and typing a letter in Word, right?
That's huge. And even just thinking of things like errors reduced, if you pull in the claim amount from your system instead of
Mhm.
accidentally typing extra zero, that makes a big
Yeah,
difference.
absolutely. And I think like tangible benefit too, think about how much easier it's going to be to update your claims language or your fraud language or little tiny things that are different about your company. Maybe you guys changed your branding and you have a different letterhead now. If you have one version of a letter and you
Yep,
just change what needs to be changed as opposed to having to do it over 100 different letters, right? And the time savings that it's going to be for the actual person doing that work, even if it is a vendor, the turnaround time is going to be so much faster, right? As opposed to like 3
yep.
or 4 weeks, it may be 2 or 3 days. So there's just going to be time savings all across the board. That's with their compliance team, claims team, everything.
That's huge. So I guess critical of it, we're talking a lot about a process update. We're gathering the inventory, we're kind of pruning it out, but
Mhm.
technology comes into play here.
Yeah.
How can technology make this process easier, or how should we use it to make this work well?
So I think that the only complexity here, or maybe not the only, but one of the biggest complexities here is having standardized and rationalized your data. You're not dealing with a super mainframe legacy process, right? And that's not every carrier is going to have that luxury right now, right? But in some aspect, they are going through some kind of transformation, whether it's to an like I said, a workflow system, something like that. I think that that's going to be pretty much like the next step to it after doing the initial inventory and seeing those. You're going to have to look at the variables that you see that are different in letter to letter and then say, okay, where can I get this? Right? Is this something that will directly feed into my letter writing system? Is this something that I can actually generate this letter out of a pass system, out of a system like a vendor system like Benekiva?
Mm-hmm.
You have to identify all those pieces, and then we really need to look at where your data is housed and how well it's structured and rationalized. I think that ends up being one of the harder parts for carriers to justify, because they are dealing with a lot of the time more manual processes around their legacy blocks. They may have some on a more modern system, right? But they don't always have that luxury of having, a data lake or something like that to feed all of their data and it all be housed in one location, right?
Yeah.
But it comes with looking and seeing what you actually need to show. But I also would challenge a carrier when I talk to them, how much data do you actually want to put in your letters, right? So I know, for example, like when I processed claims, if we communicated with a beneficiary, maybe not in letter, maybe on the phone, and told them what their estimated amount that they were going to be getting was, that would create an uproar. Because if there's a loan that wasn't included in that quote because you gave a death benefit or a face amount or something, right, that didn't have the quote values in it, then the beneficiary comes back and says, well, you told me I was going to get 10,000 and now I'm only getting 5,000, right? So I think there's always that complexity, but then there's also, if you put a lot of data out there, there's risk associated with that data, right? It's not like you're putting necessarily, not necessarily PII and things like that, but in some cases, you're sending out letters to a notifier instead of an actual beneficiary. How much information do you really want to give them? So I do recommend that the teams actually look at that and say, do we really need to give them every single piece of this? Or can that be communicated to them differently, right? And I think that will reduce your dependency on your data. So I think that's, if we're dealing with somebody who's a little bit more in the legacy space, their data is very hard to deal with. That would be my recommendations. You see how far you can streamline and reduce your data need in the letters, and then kind of go from there.
That's huge. And that actually leads really well into the next question I wanted to ask about, which is just challenges that you're going to face. So one would be data accessibility. I think another one that we hinted at earlier is the challenge of, oh, it's on, Joe's computer and he has these 7 templates, but we can't access them. So I think there's a challenge there of just making sure you have everything. But what other challenges do carriers face in this, and how do they overcome them?
A lot of times it's, I think, well, there's the change management, right? There's that piece where people are very resistant to it. And I think that people make an assumption that it's going to not, that the process, if they bring it to like a compliance team, they're not going to want to do it. But most often I've seen that compliance actually does want to change this stuff and does want to make it simpler. So I think it's a lot of it is perception of how much effort and things like that, right? We know this is not an easy thing to do, right? This is going to take time, but it's worthwhile time to spend, right? So I think that's first on that. I also think that another thing that the carriers really need to consider is their delivery of this too, because that could change how much data that they want to show or not show, right? And that's really a larger, like, company-wide decision, right? As to, do we want to start sending some of this information in different methods? Do we want to send it via email, text message, things like that, right? Communicating in any way, regardless of what it is. I try to lump that all together. It is not really technically correspondence, but you are corresponding with someone, right? So I think I just think that's my number one struggle I see, is reframing people's perspectives on how things should be done versus how they can be done, right? Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do it that way, right? So what is going to make most sense, where you're going to get your communication through clearly to your claimant, not be making your examiners have to go through, frankly, hell to do it, to execute, right? And making sure that you're meeting all compliance and regulatory guidelines.
That's huge. And it makes a difference. I think in any transformation of any kind, there's always that, "Why are we doing this? Like, why does this matter? How is this gonna move the needle?" And it
Mhm.
only works if everybody's on the same page about what
Yeah,
that why is and what it's
right.
gonna mean for them and for the claimants and everybody else too.
Yep. Yep.
So I guess we hinted at this earlier, but when you set this up, it's not a one and done. I mean, hopefully, it can be, it shouldn't be. So how do you set out from the beginning with the processes in place to make sure it's not just a one and done effort, that is
Mhm.
something that we continue doing to make sure it stays streamlined and we don't just end up in the same boat in 5 years?
So we talked about the inventory, right? So if you start with an inventory, when you actually move this stuff and actually start launching it in production and are running with it, right? You need to keep track of number one, how often your templates are being used. Now, I know that can be a little bit complex. It really depends on your reporting metrics and how you're kind of doing that today. But the frequency of use of the templates, right? Um, the changes in the templates. So as changes are made, those need to be thoroughly documented as part of this inventory so that you have, okay, well, there was a compliance update to the language for Arkansas on this day, right? That way you have, basically like a trail, an audit trail that you can follow up on. My recommendation too is once the team gets comfortable, and I recommend this outside of correspondence with any new process, is that you revisit after the team has been using it for 6 months, do some time studies. After they've been using it for 12 months, do some time studies, right? And do it with a good assortment, a good mix, and see where the difference is and where it's not. And if that difference hasn't changed, we need to look at that letter. If
Yep,
getting used to it and it's going faster, that's great. But we need to know where there's still friction.
yep,
And last thing, and I feel like everybody forgets this, and this is in the beginning of transformation or after, you need to have a feedback loop with the people using the tools and using the systems,
yep,
right? I want to know, I don't want to know from necessarily the executive's perspective how this tool is going. I want to talk to the claims manager. I want to talk to the leads. I want to talk to the claims processors. I want to know, where are you guys seeing issues? Where are you having to say, oh, well, I have to take this out and I need to do this manually because of this reason? Okay, well, why? Right? Why are you having to do this manually? So we can find those reasons, right? The feedback loop is incredibly important. And I think that everybody gets used to just moving into production and just doing their job. And when people are brought in to talk about it, it kind of feels like it's almost too late. They get a little bit jaded.
yep,
So you need to have those conversations early, and you need to also set the expectations with them when they do go live with whatever you're solving for, and say, look, I want to talk to you again, and I want to talk to you here, and I want to talk to you here, and I want to get your feedback. So as you're going through and using this tool, if there's anything that seems a little funny, note it, because they want to also be heard.
yep.
Shock, right? Like they want to be heard. It's not just the technology team that matters here. It's not just the executive team. We need to talk about the people who are actually using the tool.
Yep, and honestly, that will solve a lot of the problems with change management too,
Yeah,
because you're including them in the process. They
yeah,
understand why we're changing the process,
right.
and we're making a process that actually fits and not just something that sounds good.
Exactly. That is generally how we kind of break down the barrier a little bit, is bringing the people in and saying, "Okay, I know that you do this, but what if we did it like this?" And then they come back with a rebuttal. And then you go back and forth until you make a compromise, right? Because they also don't want to be dictated, this is how you're going to use this and that's it.
Sure.
There's nothing worse than just getting in a set of instructions saying, "Go ahead, use the system like this."
Yep,
That's not helpful.
yep,
And I know it's not always feasible to get everyone's opinion, but to
sure.
get some, just pick some folks who were involved in the transformation and who were not, and say, okay, let's do some time studies. Let's get some feedback from you guys.
And even doing almost a train the trainer mentality of,
Yeah,
even if you only have time to talk to 5 people, those 5 people can talk to their teams,
exactly.
and then you
Exactly.
trickle down and it works, and people feel connected and ready to try something new.
100%.
That's huge. So
Mhm.
I think we're coming in for a landing here, but are there any other last thoughts that you'd want to leave people with on this topic?
I just want everybody to just take a look at something. If you're a carrier, if you work at a carrier, go and just, if you have a couple minutes, take a look at some of your templates. And it doesn't have to be for claims. It can be for anything. Of course, I stick with claims because that's my bread and butter these days, right? But go and look at them and say, why do we do it this way? And just start asking those questions. It may unravel some really interesting responses.
Yep.
And I think that ultimately the focus needs to be on we're dealing with a product where we're delivering a promise, right, to a policyholder, to beneficiaries, to their families. We need to make sure that we make their experience as frictionless as possible. And the best way to do that is to have good communication from the start. So the clearer we can communicate and the faster we can communicate with them, the better off this entire transformation experience is going to be. And your customers are going to be happy, right? So it's not necessarily even just about paper correspondence, right? If you start implementing some more digital, if you are able to in your tech stack, implementing digital things where you can send a text message, say, hey, we got your message, or we got your letter or your forms. Can you please just give us a couple days? We'll look at it. All they want to know is that you're hearing them and that you've received and you're communicating with them, right? Just like the operations team, they just want to make sure that somebody is aware of what's going on and that they are being responded to.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to make sure that we're looking at it with that perspective. It's not always going to be about the dollars and cents, like right out the gate. There's, of course, going to be a cost usually associated with this, just for time's perspective, at least. But it's worthwhile time and it's worthwhile money spent because it does not only help your customers and your beneficiaries and your claimants and whoever. It also helps your teams. It helps reduce the extra things they have to do every day and lets them focus on the important stuff.
Yep. It's almost like an exponential return of how much more can your team do if you give them back 20% of their time.
Right. Yep.
That's huge. Well, I guess that's a great place to wrap it up. I would say if you get nothing else from this session, just go back and ask why and start making an inventory. Just look.
Yeah.
Open the can of worms and see what happens. But
ask why until the person you're asking is really, really annoyed. Unfortunately, that's what you have to do sometimes. And I do that a lot. But that is generally how you start getting into like the crux of the issues.
Absolutely. And it's how you understand what's really happening.
Yep.
I'd say if you guys are listening in and you have any questions or you want a second set of eyes as you're going through this, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help and consult and see how we can help make these processes better for you. But thank you guys so much for joining today's Claimversation. Thank you, Jes, for joining. I'm sure we'll have you back on again soon. And until next time, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks. Take care.